When I opened my eyes in the intensive care unit, the first thing I saw was her tear-stained face beside my bed. At that moment, I had no idea that those very tears would mark the beginning of the most horrifying truth of my life. That evening I was walking home from the store. Just a routine trip. I had bought milk and bread for breakfast. The street was dimly lit, and when I spotted a familiar car swaying erratically down the road, my heart stopped. It was Melinda, my wife. Even from a distance I could tell she was drunk. I stepped onto the road, waving my arms frantically, hoping she would see me and stop. I thought I could save her from a potential accident. But instead, a nightmare unfolded. She didn't notice me at all. The impact was devastating. When I regained consciousness in the hospital, I learned that my name was Sam, I was 34 years old, and doctors couldn't promise whether I would ever walk again. Broken spine, multiple fractures, severe concussion. Melinda never left my bedside, crying constantly, begging for forgiveness. She told me she had been at a party with colleagues and had drunk far too much. The first months were pure hell. Endless surgeries, excruciating pain, overwhelming despair. I watched as Melinda transformed before my eyes, losing weight, losing sleep, consumed by guilt. The medical bills were astronomical and our savings quickly depleted. Insurance covered some expenses, but the specialized treatments I needed were mostly out-of-pocket costs. Melinda took a leave of absence from her marketing job to care for me full-time. She would spend 12 to 14 hours a day at the hospital, helping with basic tasks I could no longer perform. Feeding me, helping me use the bathroom, reading to me during the long, painful nights when sleep was impossible. The physical therapy sessions were brutal. My spine had been severely damaged at the L2-L3 vertebrae, and the neurologist explained that while some sensation remained, the chances of regaining full mobility were less than 20%. Each day brought new exercises that felt like torture, small movements that healthy people take for granted but were monumental challenges for me. After a year of this torment, watching Melinda sacrifice everything for me, I said what I thought was the right thing. Melinda, you should find someone else while you're still young. Leave me. I don't want to be a burden. She broke down completely, screaming that she would never abandon me, that it was all her fault, that she would stay by my side forever. And I believed her. But life had prepared an entirely different script for us. During the second year of my recovery, Melinda returned to work part-time to help with our financial situation. The medical expenses had forced us to take a second mortgage on our house, and we were struggling to make ends meet. Her guilt over the accident made her work even harder to provide for us, often taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. 2 painful years of rehabilitation attempts passed. Countless procedures, fleeting hopes followed by crushing disappointments. I still couldn't stand. And then David appeared in Melinda's life, a widower whose wife had died of cancer several years earlier. They met at a cafe near the hospital where I was receiving treatment. David was 38 years old, a successful architect who had been alone for 3 years since losing his wife, Sarah, to breast cancer. He had no children from his previous marriage, as Sarah had been diagnosed before they could start a family. He was financially stable, emotionally mature, and desperately lonely, everything that made him the perfect candidate to fill the void in Melinda's life. Initially, she spoke of him as just a friend who understood the pain of loss. She would mention their conversations casually, telling me how he helped her process the guilt and trauma of the accident. According to her, David had struggled with similar feelings when Sarah died, the sense that he could have done something different, the weight of survivor's guilt. Then she mentioned him more frequently. I noticed how her voice changed when she talked about him, how her eyes lit up. She would come home from the hospital with small gifts that David had given her, a coffee, a book, a flower from the hospital garden. She claimed these were just friendly gestures from someone who understood what she was going through. But what could I do? I was the one who had told her to find someone else. I had given her permission to leave, and in some twisted way, I felt I had no right to complain if she was finding comfort elsewhere. But the worst was yet to come. One day, while Melinda was showering, her phone buzzed with a text message. The screen lit up with David's name and I could see the preview of the message. "Can't wait to see you tonight, my love. The hotel room is..." The rest was cut off, but I had seen enough. The realization hit me like a second car accident. These weren't just casual coffee meetings. Melinda was living a double life, caring for me during the day, then meeting David in the evenings for romantic encounters. She had fallen in love with him but continued playing the role of a devoted wife in front of me. The rage at my own helplessness burned inside me. I couldn't confront her directly without revealing that I had seen the message, which would lead to questions about why I was looking at her phone. I was trapped in my wheelchair, dependent on her for everything, while she was building a secret life with another man. I began investigating on my own, limited by my physical constraints but determined to understand the scope of her betrayal. When Melinda would help me with my laptop for entertainment, I would quickly check her social media accounts. I discovered that she and David had been connected on Facebook for months, regularly liking and commenting on each other's posts with inside jokes and references I didn't understand. During this time, I learned more details about their relationship through overheard phone conversations and small inconsistencies in her stories. David lived in a comfortable suburban house, the kind of place Melinda had always dreamed of. He was financially stable, emotionally available, and most importantly, he could give her the normal life she craved. I discovered they had been planning weekend getaways together. When Melinda claimed she was visiting her sister in Portland or attending work conferences in Seattle, she was actually with David. They had created an elaborate web of lies that allowed them to live as a couple while maintaining the facade of her devotion to me. The psychological torture of knowing but being unable to confront the truth was unbearable. I would lie awake at night, listening to her sleep peacefully beside me, knowing that in her dreams she was probably with him. The woman who had promised never to leave me had already left emotionally, she was just going through the motions of care. One evening, while pretending to nap, I overheard a phone conversation that revealed the depth of their relationship. Melinda was in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones to David. "I know this is complicated, but I love you. Sam is getting stronger every day and the doctors think he might regain some mobility. We need to be patient just a little longer." David's response came through clearly on speakerphone. "Melinda, I love you too, but I can't keep living this lie. Either you tell him the truth or I will. He deserves to know and we deserve to be together openly." My heart pounded as I listened to them discuss my future as if I were already dead. They talked about moving in together once I was settled in a long-term care facility. David had researched the best assisted living homes in the area and was prepared to help cover the costs. They had rationalized their affair by convincing themselves that I would be better off not knowing, that they were protecting me from additional pain. But I was determined to prove them wrong. I began training with maniacal determination. Doctors said it was pointless, but I wouldn't listen. Every day, every hour, I fought against my body, forcing it to obey. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the emotional agony of being betrayed by the person I loved most. My physical therapist, Maria, noticed the change in my attitude and intensity. She had been working with spinal injury patients for 15 years and had never seen someone push themselves as hard as I did. When she asked about my motivation, I simply told her I had something important to fight for. Maria began incorporating experimental techniques into my therapy, including electrical stimulation and advanced mobility exercises that weren't typically attempted until much later in recovery. She believed in my determination and was willing to push the boundaries of conventional treatment to help me achieve my goals. Months passed and slowly, incredibly, I began to feel sensations returning to my legs. At first, it was just tingling, then brief moments of muscle response. Maria was amazed at my progress and began documenting my case for medical journals. She said I was defying every statistical prediction about spinal cord recovery. During this period, Melinda's relationship with David intensified. Through careful observation, I realized they were now seeing each other almost every evening. She would tuck me into bed, wait for me to seemingly fall asleep, then sneak out of the house. She would return before dawn, shower quietly, and slip back into bed as if nothing had happened. I began keeping a detailed journal of her absences, documenting every lie, every fabricated story, every time she claimed to be somewhere she wasn't. The notebook became my anchor to sanity, proof that I wasn't imagining the betrayal that was happening right under my nose. The breaking point came when I overheard another phone conversation, this time about their future plans. Melinda was discussing pregnancy with David. She wanted to have his children but was afraid of how it would look given my condition. David assured her that once they were officially together after my situation was resolved, they could start a family immediately. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had destroyed my ability to walk was planning to create new life with another man while I fought every day just to regain basic mobility. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that it transcended anger and entered a realm of pure determination. 3 years. 3 long, agonizing years it took me to take my first steps. The day I finally stood up from my wheelchair without assistance, Maria cried tears of joy. She called it a medical miracle, a testament to human willpower overcoming impossible odds. But when I finally stood on my own feet, there was no joy. Because by that time, Melinda was pregnant with David's child. Before I continue, please pause the video and subscribe to the channel. I know that not everyone likes all videos, so I try to publish a variety of stories for different age groups and preferences so that no one is left out. I also read all your comments to better understand your preferences, so don't hesitate to write comments. It helps to improve the content. You can write, "I like nuclear revenge" or "pro-revenge where a woman cheats" or something else. I will be very grateful for that. Thank you in advance for your time. I will continue the story. The timing was cruel and perfect. Just as I achieved what doctors had deemed impossible, the truth of her betrayal became impossible to hide. Her pregnancy was obvious, and since we hadn't been intimate since the accident, there was no question about paternity. When she learned I could walk, she didn't celebrate. Instead, she fell to her knees and began sobbing bitterly. David was also there that day. Apparently, they had planned to tell me together about their relationship and her pregnancy, assuming I would never recover enough to complicate their plans. David couldn't look me in the eye. He mumbled something about not meaning for things to happen this way, about how much they both cared about my well-being. His words were hollow, meaningless platitudes that couldn't mask the reality of what they had done. The confrontation that followed was devastating. Melinda confessed everything through broken sobs. She told me about her relationship with David, about how they had planned to marry after I died or after they had finally accepted my permanent disability. She was carrying another man's child while I stood before her on my own legs, living proof that everything could have been different. She revealed that they had even discussed moving away together once I was settled in a long-term care facility. David had been prepared to support my medical expenses while building a new life with Melinda. They had looked at houses in Portland where David's sister lived, and had planned to start fresh where no one knew their story. The details poured out like water from a broken dam. They had been together physically for over a year, had said, "I love you," to each other countless times, had made elaborate plans for their future together. David had even bought her an engagement ring, which she kept hidden in a safety deposit box at the bank. But the most horrifying part wasn't the betrayal itself. The most horrifying realization was that if I hadn't recovered, if I had remained disabled forever, she would have continued living with David, given birth to his child, and I would never have discovered the truth. She would have cared for me out of guilt while loving another man, and I would have died grateful for her sacrifice. David left that same day and didn't return for weeks. During his absence, Melinda went through a complete breakdown. She stopped eating, barely slept, and spent hours crying while clutching ultrasound photos of the baby she was carrying. She begged me for forgiveness, claimed she had never meant for any of it to happen, that the guilt of the accident had driven her into David's arms. She told me about the night they first kissed, 3 months after the accident. She had been crying in the hospital cafe, overwhelmed by the medical bills and the uncertainty of my recovery. David had offered comfort, and in her vulnerable state, she had found solace in his arms. What started as emotional support had quickly become physical intimacy. Melinda described how guilty she felt every time she was with David, but also how alive she felt for the first time since the accident. With him, she could forget about medical equipment, insurance claims, and the constant worry about my condition. She could pretend to be a normal woman in love with a normal man, planning a normal future. When David finally returned, the three of us had the most difficult conversation of our lives. He admitted that he loved Melinda but had never intended to hurt me. He explained how their relationship had begun innocently, shared coffee breaks while waiting during my therapy sessions had evolved into deep conversations about loss and hope. David told me about his own journey through grief after losing his wife Sarah to cancer. He had been alone for 3 years when he met Melinda, and her compassion had helped him heal. What started as mutual support had gradually transformed into love, but by then the situation had become impossibly complicated. He apologized profusely, but his words felt rehearsed, as if he had practiced this speech during his weeks of absence. He offered to disappear from our lives entirely, to support the child financially without being involved personally. But we all knew it was too late for such simple solutions. Melinda begged me to stay, claiming she loved me, that David had been a mistake, that she would terminate the pregnancy if I asked her to. But her words felt hollow. I could see in her eyes that she was torn between guilt and genuine feelings for David. The woman I had married was gone, replaced by someone consumed by remorse and confusion. But I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I calmly signed all the divorce papers and told her, "Melinda, I'm giving you what you truly want, freedom from me. Go to him." The decision wasn't born of nobility or forgiveness. It came from a place of exhausted clarity. I realized that fighting for a woman who had betrayed me so completely would be another form of imprisonment. I had spent 3 years fighting to walk again. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life fighting for love that no longer existed. I didn't create scenes, didn't scream, didn't make threats. I simply let go. The legal proceedings took months, during which we lived in the same house like polite strangers. Melinda tried several times to change my mind, but I remained resolute. I had discovered that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, and I wasn't going to waste that strength on a lost cause. During the divorce proceedings, more painful details emerged. David and Melinda had opened a joint bank account where they had been saving money for their future together. They had taken couples' photos that she kept hidden in her work locker. They had discussed baby names and nursery decorations for the child she was carrying. The financial settlement was complicated by the medical expenses and the fact that Melinda's actions had caused my disability. My lawyer pushed for a larger settlement, arguing that her drunk driving and subsequent abandonment constituted extreme emotional distress. But I instructed him to keep things simple. I wanted the divorce finalized as quickly as possible. David returned during the final stages of our divorce, and they married a few months after our divorce was finalized. She gave birth to a son, and in what shocked me most, they named the child Sam in my honor. When I learned about this through mutual friends, I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. She had given my name to another man's child, as if trying to atone for her guilt or preserve some part of me in her new life. The irony was overwhelming. Somewhere in the world, a boy was growing up with my name, never knowing he was named after the man his mother had hit with her car and then betrayed. Friends and family knew the whole truth about the accident, that she had hit me while drunk driving. So after this entire betrayal saga, they didn't maintain close contact with her. They didn't openly condemn her, but the distance was palpable. Melinda found herself in her new life with minimal support from old acquaintances who couldn't understand how she could betray someone she had nearly killed. Through mutual friends, I later learned that Melinda struggled with postpartum depression and guilt after little Sam was born. She had sought therapy to deal with the trauma of everything that had happened. The therapist had apparently told her that naming the child after me was a form of psychological penance, an attempt to keep me in her life while building a new one without me. David, to his credit, had been supportive during her emotional struggles, but their relationship bore the permanent scar of how it had begun. Friends who knew their story often looked at them with barely concealed judgment. Their love, no matter how genuine it might have become, was forever tainted by the circumstances of its origin. Meanwhile, I began the slow process of rebuilding my life from scratch. Physical therapy continued to improve my mobility, though I would never be completely normal. I walked with a slight limp and couldn't stand for extended periods, but I was mobile and independent. The emotional healing took much longer than the physical recovery. The first year after the divorce was the loneliest period of my life. I had to learn how to live alone, how to cook for one person, how to fill the silent hours that had once been occupied by conversation with Melinda. The house felt enormous and empty, filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. I considered selling the house and starting completely fresh somewhere else, but ultimately decided to stay. Running away felt like another form of defeat, and I had already done too much fighting to give up now. Instead, I renovated the spaces that held the most painful memories, turning our former bedroom into a home office and converting the guest room where I had spent months recovering into a library. 1 year after the divorce, I met a wonderful woman named Rebecca. She worked as a nurse at the rehabilitation center and understood my history without being afraid of my physical limitations. She had her own story of overcoming adversity. She had cared for her elderly parents through terminal illnesses and understood the complexities of love, duty, and sacrifice. Rebecca was different from Melinda in every way that mattered. Where Melinda had been impulsive and dramatic, Rebecca was steady and thoughtful. She didn't try to fix me or save me, she simply accepted me as I was. Our relationship developed slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than guilt, pity, or desperate circumstances. She had been divorced for 5 years when we met, after her ex-husband left her for a younger colleague. Unlike my situation, her divorce had been straightforward: no disability, no pregnancy, no dramatic betrayals. Just the simple dissolution of a marriage that had run its course. She understood betrayal but had processed it in a healthier way than I initially had. Rebecca never pressured me to talk about Melinda or David, but she listened when I needed to process my experiences. She helped me understand that forgiveness wasn't about excusing their behavior, it was about freeing myself from the poison of resentment. Under her gentle guidance, I began to see my survival and recovery not as a victory over Melinda and David, but as a victory over the circumstances that had tried to destroy me. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family members who had supported me through the darkest period of my life. Rebecca's parents welcomed me warmly, and her teenage daughter from her first marriage accepted me as a stepfather with surprising grace. For the first time in years I felt like I belonged somewhere. The wedding was everything my first wedding with Melinda hadn't been: simple, genuine, and focused on the commitment rather than the spectacle. We wrote our own vows, and mine included a promise to choose love over fear, healing over resentment, and hope over despair. Rebecca's vows included a promise to love me not in spite of my scars, but including them as part of the man she had fallen in love with. Sometimes I think about the strange turn my life has taken. Somewhere out there lives a boy named Sam who will never know he was named after a man his mother hit with her car and then betrayed. Meanwhile, I'm building new happiness with a woman who loves me not out of guilt, but simply because of who I am. Occasionally, I receive updates about Melinda and David through the small-town gossip network that connects all our old friends. They had a second child, a daughter, 2 years after Sam was born. David's architectural firm is doing well, and they live in the suburban house Melinda had always dreamed of. On the surface, they appear to have achieved the normal life they wanted. But I also hear whispers about the ongoing challenges in their marriage. The guilt that drove Melinda to seek therapy never fully resolved, and David struggles with the judgment of people who know their story. They've moved twice, apparently trying to escape the shadow of their past, but you can't outrun your own conscience. The most terrifying aspect of this entire story isn't that she hit me with her car while drunk. The most terrifying part is that she could look me in the eye every single day, playing the role of a loving wife, while living with another man and carrying his child. The level of deception required for that kind of double life speaks to a capacity for compartmentalization that I find genuinely frightening. But perhaps there's a strange justice in how everything unfolded. Melinda got the life she wanted, but it came with the permanent weight of guilt and the knowledge that everyone knew how she had obtained her happiness. David got the woman he loved, but their relationship will forever be shadowed by the circumstances of its beginning. I lost my wife and my physical health, but I gained something more valuable: the knowledge of who I really am and what I'm capable of overcoming. Years later, I occasionally wonder what would have happened if I had never recovered, if I had accepted my disability and never discovered the truth. Would ignorance have been bliss? Would I have died grateful for Melinda's sacrifice, never knowing that her care was motivated by guilt rather than love? Or would the truth have eventually surfaced anyway, perhaps making the betrayal even more devastating? I'll never know, and perhaps that's for the best. What I do know is that surviving that accident, both the physical impact and the emotional devastation that followed, taught me that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. The human capacity for resilience, for rebuilding from complete destruction, is remarkable. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't getting back what you lost, but discovering you no longer need it. My relationship with Rebecca has taught me the difference between love born of desperation and love born of choice. With Melinda, our entire relationship after the accident was built on guilt, obligation, and the traumatic bond of shared catastrophe. With Rebecca, our love is built on mutual respect, genuine compatibility, and the conscious choice to build something beautiful together. Today, I run a small consulting business from my home office, helping other people navigate insurance claims and disability services, knowledge I gained the hard way during my own recovery. Rebecca continues her nursing career, and we've created a life together that is quiet, stable, and genuinely happy. It's not the dramatic love story that novels are written about, but it's real and sustainable in a way that my marriage to Melinda never was. The boy named Sam is now 6 years old. Sometimes I imagine what I would say to him if we ever met, whether I would tell him the story of how he got his name. But that's David's and Melinda's burden to bear, not mine. I've built a new life that doesn't require their destruction or their redemption. That, perhaps, is the truest form of victory, not needing your betrayers to suffer for you to be happy. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.